Hey, it's time for the final in our video series on the spiritual and biblical aspects of giving. If you remember a few weeks ago, I talked to you about how we begin at the most basic level of generosity by simply saying, I want to do my part. If I'm going to be a part of this church family, I'm going to help pay the bills. So that's where we begin. And then we move to the level of gratitude, where we simply say, God, you've been so good to me and you've done so much for me. I'm going to be generous with your work just out of an expression of thanksgiving. And then we move out of the realm of feelings and onto the foundation of biblical truth. And at the third level, we just get to a point of saying, I want to obey the Scripture. So we look at the Bible and we see what it says about giving and tithing, and we decide we're going to live a life that is on the foundation of biblical truth. So at the third level, we're just giving out of obedience. And then the last time I talked to you about vision giving, where you begin to think like God. And with your resources, you do as Jesus said, create friends for yourself so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. At that fourth level, you're just at a position where you want part of your resources to last forever. And so you invest in vision. You believe in the work of God, and so you invest in it so you'll have an investment in the work of God. Then that brings us to the fifth and highest level. That is love. Love is the highest. You may remember when Paul is writing to the Corinthians, he said, faith, hope, and love will last forever. But the greatest of these is love. So when we give out of a heart that just loves God, that is the highest and holiest and purest form of generosity there is. Both Mark and Luke's gospel tell us of a widow who stood up and gave more than anybody else. Though in sheer numbers, she probably gave the smallest offering that day. But Jesus said she gave more because she gave from her heart. She gave out of love. We call it the widow's mite. You know, early in our ministry, I had a discussion with a man that really sort of epitomized this principle. He and I were working together on some church building project, and he was much older than I, and I was just a young man entering the ministry. And we began, for some reason, to talk about tithing. As the conversation went on, he mentioned to me that he did not believe tithing was a New Testament concept. So we started the debate, and I talked about Genesis and Leviticus and Matthew 23 and those scriptures that we talk about when it comes to tithing in the Bible, and he remained unconvinced. And I asked him a question as we moved through that debate. I said, well, brother, if you don't believe that tithing is part of the New Testament covenant, why do you tithe? And he simply said, because I love Jesus, because I love the church. And while doctrinally we were somewhat apart, yet spiritually, I believe he had it. The highest and holiest form of giving is giving simply out of love for God. My mind goes back to a time when I was a guest speaker at another church over a series of nights. And throughout that week, there was one in particular family in the church that kind of hung around after church and got to know us and visited with us and asked us to pray with them and just kind of walk with them through some difficult times they were going through. And I'll never forget the last night that we were at that church, as I came down off the platform, the man of the house comes up to me, thanks me for our ministry to him that week, talks about what it means to him. And then he said, you know, I don't have much. I have very little. Things are very difficult for my family. But I want to give you something. And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out this kind of rattered and tattered dollar bill. It's torn, it's crinkled. He said, I just want you to have this. And I felt like at that moment I had one of those events where the widow's mite, where I took in my hand not just a dollar. I took it in my hand an expression of someone's love for God. So I didn't spend it. It's in the natural world, it's worth maybe a fraction of a gallon of gas. But to me, it's a reminder of someone who appreciated the ministry of the Word, enough to put his last dollar into it. I feel like that night he was operating at the fifth level of giving, though he gave very little. And when we can break out of the idea of it's how much and understand it's why we give. It's the heart that gives. It's a heart that has had the shackles of greed broken off of it by the love of God. Then we give at the fifth level.